Checkouts by Cynthia Rylant. Her parents had moved her to Cincinnati, to a large house with beveled glass, windows, and several porches, and the history her mother liked to emphasize. "You'll love the house," they said. "You'll be lonely at first," they admitted, "but you're so nice, you'll make friends fast." And as an impulse tore at her to lie on the floor, to hold through their ankles and to tell them she felt like she was dying, to offer anything, anything at all, so that they might allow her to finish growing up in the town of her childhood. They firmed their mouths, spoke from their chests, and they said, "It's decided." They moved her to Cincinnati, where for a month she spent the greater part of every day in a room full of beveled glass windows, sifting through photographs of the life she'd lived and left behind. But it was difficult work, suffering, and in its own way, a kind of art. Finally, she didn't have the energy for it anymore. So she emerged from the beautiful house and fell in love with a bag boy at the supermarket. Of course, this didn't happen all at once, just like that. But the sequence of things, that's exactly the way it happened. She liked to grocery shop. She loved it in the way some people love to drive long country roads, because doing it, she could think and relax and wander. Her parents wrote up this list and handed it to her, and off she went without complaint to perform what they regarded as a great sacrifice of her time and a sign that she was indeed a very nice girl. She never told them how much she loved grocery shopping, only that she was willing to do it. She had an intuition which told her that her parents were not safe for sharing such strong, important facts about herself. Let them think they knew her. Once inside the supermarket, her hands firmly around the handle of the cart, she would lapse into a kind of reverie and wheel towards the produce. Like a Tibetan monk in solitary meditation, she calmed to a point of deep, deep happiness. This feeling came to her reliably, if strangely only in the supermarket. Then one day the bag boy dropped her jar of mayonnaise, and that's how she fell in love. He was nervous, first day on the job, and along had come this fascinating girl standing in the checkout line with the unfocused stare one often sees in young children. Her face turned enough away that she might take several looks at her as he packed sturdy bags full of food and the goods of modern life. She interested him because her hair was red and thick, and she had placed a huge orange bow nearly the size of a small hat. That was enough to distract him. When he finally, it was her groceries he was packing, she looked at him and smiled, and he could respond only by busting her jar of mayonnaise on the floor. Shards of glass and oozing cream decorated the area around his feet. She loved him at exactly that moment. And if he'd known this, perhaps he wouldn't have fallen into the brown depression he fell into, which lasted the rest of his shift. He believed he must have looked the jackass in her eyes, and he envied the sureness of everyone around him: the cocky cashier at the register, the grim and harried store manager, the bland butcher, and the brazen bag boys who smoked in the warehouse on their breaks. He wanted a second chance, another chance to be confident and to say witty things to her as he threw tin cans into her bags, persuading her to allow him to help her to the car so he might learn just a little about her. Check out the floor of the car for signs of hobbies or fetishes, and the bumpers for clues as to beliefs and loyalties. But he busted her jar of mayonnaise, and nothing else worked out for the rest of the day. Strange how attractive clumsiness can be. She left the supermarket with stars in her eyes, for she had loved the way his long, nervous fingers moved from the conveyor belt to the bags, how deftly, until the mayonnaise. They had picked up her items and placed them into her bag. She had loved the way the hair kept falling into his eyes as he leaned over to grab a box or a tin, and the tattered brown shoes he wore with no socks, and the left side of his collar turned in rather than out. The bag boy seemed a wonderful contrast to the perfectly beautiful house she had been forced to accept as her home, to the history she hated. to the loneliness she had become used to, and she couldn't wait to come back for more of his awkwardness and dishevelment. Incredibly, it was another 4 weeks before they saw each other again. As fate would have it, her visits to the supermarket never coincided with his schedule to bag. Each time she went into the store, her eyes scanned the checkouts at once, her heart in her mouth. And each hour he worked, bag boy kept one eye on the door, watching for the red haired girl with the big orange bow. Yet in their disappointment these weeks, there was a kind of ecstasy. It's a reason enough to be alive. The hope you might see again some face which meant something to you. The anticipation of meeting the bag boy eased the girl's painful transition into her new and jarring life in Cincinnati. It provided for her an anchor amid all that impersonal and unfamiliar. She spent less time on the thoughts of what she had left behind and was concentrated on what might lie ahead. And for the boy, the long and often tedious hours at the supermarket, which provided no challenge other than that of showing up the following workday. These hours became possibilities of mystery and romance for him as he watched the electric door for the girl in the orange bow. And when finally they did meet up again, neither offered a clue that he or she had been the object of obsessive thoughts for weeks. She spotted him as soon as she came into the store, but she kept her eyes strictly in front of her as she pulled out the cart and wheeled it towards the produce. And he, too, knew the instant she came through the door, though the orange bow was gone, replaced by a small but bright yellow flower instead. And he never once turned his head in her direction, but watched her from the corner of his vision as he tried to swallow back the fear in his throat. It's odd how we sometimes deny ourselves the very pleasure which we have longed for and which was finally within our reach. For some perverse reason she would not have been able to articulate, the girl did not bring her cart to the bag boy's check when her shopping was done, and the bag boy let her leave the store, pretending no notice of her. This is often the way of children. When they truly want a thing, they pretend they don't. And then they grow angry when no one tries harder to give them this thing they so casually rejected. They soon find themselves in a rage simply because they cannot say yes when they mean yes. Humans are very complicated, and perhaps cats, who have been known to react in the same way, though the resulting rage can only be guessed at. The girl hated herself for not checking out the boy's line, and the boy hated himself for not catching her eye when saying hello. And they most sincerely hated each other without having ever exchanged even 2 minutes of conversation. Eventually, in fact, within a week, a kind of intelligent boy who lived very near her beautiful house asked the girl to a movie, and she gave up her fancy for the bag boy at the supermarket. The bag boy himself searched for something better and ended up in a bookstore where scores of fascinating girls lingered like honeybees around a hive. Some months later, the bag boy and the girl with the orange bow again crossed paths, standing in line with their dates at a movie theater, glancing towards each other, smiled slightly, and then looked away, as strangers on public buses often do when no one is moving off the bus